My name's Allison McCauley, and I'm very excited to welcome you today to a conversation about a topic that it seems is on everyone's mind. It's the question of how to support remote workers. It's been important since the beginning of the web, but now with a radical shift in how so many employee populations are now working from home, securing the remote worker has become one of the most important questions that leaders are facing today. So we're going to be hearing this morning from three speakers who will all bring us their perspective on this topic. And I would especially like to thank NTT for sponsoring this discussion. The first speaker that I'd like to welcome to the stage is Joseph Wolfgram. He is a lauded technology leader and speaker and podcaster. And he has been a chief technology officer in multi-billion-dollar healthcare organizations, but is also relied on by many organizations for his executive coaching. And in that role, he gets to really tap into shifts in the workplace as they happen. So welcome, Joseph.
Why, thank you, Allison. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to hearing your perspective. So first, I'm hoping you can share your perspective as a CTO of organizations, especially those for which security is so mission critical. And of course, remote work isn't new, but now new groups of employees, and in some cases, all employees are working remotely. So I'm curious what you think about how we should be evolving, how we think about supporting these employees from that CTO perspective.
Sure. Yeah, and it's a great topic and very timely. You know, I was thinking about this. The technology to enable remote knowledge workers has been available to us for many years. I can remember piloting my first virtual desktop sessions back at the Gates Foundation in 1999. That's more than 20 years ago. So the
Yeah.
technology is not the barrier to effectively working remote. But I think there are two challenges that we need to address today. The first is, their culture and process. And organizational culture has just got to evolve to match today's working remote. And it begins with trusting the remote worker. The days of the Industrial Revolution, where all the employees punched a clock and were watched closely by their managers as they performed work, that's got to remain part of our history, right? Anyone trying to manage this way today is wasting the company's time and money. I believe in some cases, layers of middle management can even be removed or repurposed to higher level work if we're taking the time to adjust our organizational structures to match the possibilities of a remote work world. Now, processes also need to morph. Our methods of communicating and lines of communication have got to evolve. Hierarchy and chain of command were important in Industrial Revolution, important in military chain of command, but they just aren't that important in business anymore. And if trying to carry that heavy bureaucracy from the office over to the online world, I think that's just silly. Today's remote worker is able to communicate in real time and directly with the most important people. Isn't that what we want to run most effectively and competitively in today's business world? The online tools certainly do allow us to do this, but it depends on our culture and our process norms. I have one other thought too, and that's around meetings. I have had a long-term love-hate relationship with meetings. We got to have them, but they're kind of a necessary evil. They're one of the most expensive ways that we can do business, whether it's face-to-face or camera to camera. In this instance, every person participating has an associated hourly cost. And when you have a meeting with 6, 12, or sometimes 20 people, that conversation can reach 4 figures really easily. Meetings don't need to be 60 minutes. They don't even need to be 30 minutes. Schedule them for 15 or 20. Just as work and conversation tends to expand to fill the time allotted for a meeting, it can also contract to fit the shorter format. And so I hope people are exploring this as an opportunity with remote workers. The ad hoc communication that's possible with online tools could easily address questions that might have been asked in a longer format meeting. And platforms like WebEx Teams allow all staff to benefit from the answers to those questions in near real time anyway. So I suggest today's leaders focus on culture and the process in this new world of remote workers, and don't try to bring the old and inefficient methods of work to the digital online world. This is a new opportunity, especially for those workers who have not traditionally been permitted to work remotely. I think there's a big opportunity there.
It's fascinating how there's this interplay between culture shift and what you're talking about with meetings. It feels like there's a lot of interplay between the two. How do you start as a leader? How do you start thinking about that shift and that change?
Well, I think it begins with recognition that this, big remote workforce today is a new opportunity. It's a new playing field, and in some cases, it's a leveled playing field. Big companies that had, big all-staff meetings, different time zones and things, and some people were in person, and others were trying to dial in and call in. And well, now everybody's remote, and satisfaction for things like all team meetings have gone way up in some organizations. So I think those are the types of opportunities we should be looking for as leaders to help with that transition to, if not a full-time all-time remote workforce, one that's definitely more capable of working remotely more often.
Okay, so I have to ask, because I understand that you've also transitioned from CTO to the life of a digital nomad, and I've got to imagine that's given you incredible perspective about what it is like to be a fully remote worker. So I'm curious, what insights did you gain from that and living that life, about how we can better support and secure remote work?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's been an eye opener. There's definitely been some insights that I've gained from an end user perspective that I don't think I would have gotten from the CTO's office. Today, my wife and I operate our businesses from the open road. We travel the country coast to coast in our motorhome, and we rely on the internet to stay connected with clients all over the world. So the first insight I got, and I got it pretty quickly, was that high bandwidth connections aren't common outside of metropolitan areas. They're just not. Most places we want to be and visit are sort of remote. Think Zion National Park and Bryce Canyon. Not a lot of high speed internet out there. We did many, many things to try to solve this connectivity problem, including, diversifying provider connections. And I bonded them through dedicated servers. I put roof mounted antennas and mobile encrypted Wi-Fi broadcasting. I did this all from the motorhome. But even with all of that, on occasion, we'd find ourselves driving a few miles away from our campsite to find a strong enough signal so that we can see clients from the driver's seat of our Tesla. It's less frequent now. And the world is a little bit more understanding today than before COVID. So that's another advantage. But the second insight was really around security. There are a lot of wide open and really scary internet connections out there, particularly in RV parks and resorts. Encrypted traffic tunnels are essential, especially when all of our business and financial transactions are done online. This is a budget item in my business that I don't like to spend money on, but I really don't have a choice. You either pay now or you pay dearly later.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one thing I am optimistic about, though, I think is kind of cool, is the future of Starlink. The low Earth orbiting internet satellites that are being launched by SpaceX today. I think this is going to deliver real high bandwidth internet connectivity from anywhere in the world. And they're going to focus in areas that are rural and typically underserved. So, I'm in line to be one of the first subscribers when that's available, for sure, because it's just vital to keep productivity high when you're running it.
Yeah, and I actually would like to dive a little bit more into the subject of productivity. So, for business leaders, keeping productivity up high is really paramount. And so, can you share with us a little bit more about how productivity is impacted when employees transition to remote, and what are the surprises, and how do we need to be thinking about really supporting productivity yet also preserving security?
Yeah, and that is a great question. And, probably everybody watching this has got their own personal experience with what happens to productivity when you quickly transfer to full-time remote work. There's an adjustment. We all know this. Getting used to the technology and the tendency to want to kind of fit this online working world to match the way we used to work in brick and mortar offices is we go through. But after a week or so, we get the hang of that. But then there are other factors that quickly become apparent. We lose the natural structure and boundaries that a dedicated office environment brings. we're tending to children and pets and things like home chores and shopping. They're all mixed in with meetings and work deadlines. We miss seeing coworkers and having impromptu conversations with them. And these are important aspects of the office that I think we need to translate into the online world at some point, or little by little over time. But I think that mix of personal and work tasks is great for productivity, actually. Switching between a focused mental concentration on something at work and then folding the laundry can provide natural breaks that your brain needs, and your eyes, to function optimally. It's like task switching, though, not multitasking. And that's important because humans, in study after study, aren't very good at multitasking. Especially men aren't very good at multitasking, but we are good at microtasking and quick switches between activities. And I think this new working from home world really allows for that. So the organizations that manage by productivity outcomes of their employees and not by the hours that are punched on the clock, they're the ones that are more immediately realizing nice productivity gains from the remote workforce. Now, this is partially because the natural barriers of the office are gone and employees are working more hours on average. Isn't that interesting? Partially,
Yes.
right? Partially thanks because we're no longer sitting in traffic in that daily commute. So some of this is good because that mix of activity can provide extra mental power for longer hours of more productive work. But I also would caution workers that are new to working remote not to lose the personal life balance even more. It's kind of paradoxical that you'd think that you're working at home, you'd have more home life balance, but we tend to work more hours. So it's not healthy or productive long-term to work constantly during your waking hours, right? But, and so in terms of security, there's a lot of risk taking going on right now in the corporate environment for those leaders that I've been talking to. Companies that weren't set up for a fully remote workforce have scaled very quickly to accommodate this shift in staffing and remote work. But they're going to need to, if they haven't already, start to focus really seriously on fortifying those connections moving forward. For example, I think something like continuous authentication technologies are really promising because they lower the friction that the end users have to deal with. At the same time, they ensure security throughout the online session. So that's a technology, I've been advising a lot of folks to look at more closely. We have a long way to go to ensure we don't have huge security issues popping up in this world of remote workers. So I hope IT leaders out there right now are focused on that very issue.
Yeah, and it strikes me with this sudden shift, and also all of our behavior is changing. And so we all need to learn how to work differently, and we really all need to learn how to support differently as well. There's just a lot of work that needs to be done and a lot of exploration, I think, to be able to do it really well. So I really appreciate your perspective on that.
Absolutely.
We've had a poll come in, so I hope you've had a chance to submit your answers. It's really interesting. So in the question of what have you enjoyed most about working from home, I find it fascinating that there were many different attributes named, and the winning answer is all of the above. So no commute, flexible hours, increased productivity, work-life balance. I think that remote work is here to stay. And then the second question is about how often would you like to work at home once COVID-19 is no longer a concern. Oh, those days I hope are ahead. And 3 to 4 days a week was the winning answer, although a lot of people said every day. So again, this has become something where it's increasingly important to figure out how to do this really well. And how often did you work remotely for COVID? Once a week was the prevailing answer. So we're seeing a big shift. And also, as we're continuing to discuss, I want to encourage everyone to put in your questions in the questions tab. Feel free to chat in the chat box. And I'd love to welcome 2 more speakers to stage. We've got some more perspective to share. So Mitchell Hershkowitz is the Vice President General Manager of Intelligent Workplace at NTT, and Dave Stearns is the Director of America's Collaboration at Cisco. Welcome, Mitchell.
Good morning, Allison. Good morning, Joseph.
Good morning.
Great to see you. And hello, Dave.
Hello. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning,
Excellent. Dave. Okay, so there's clearly so much change in the way we work, and we're all learning that there's both challenges and opportunities. But regardless, it's very much impacting our technology needs. So Mitchell and Dave, I'm so excited because I know you're going to share with us what you're seeing clients do about this and emerging best practices. And so Mitchell, I was hoping you could start us off by sharing insight from a user experience perspective, which is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to actually talk about user experience, IT experience, and executive experience. But as we take a look at the user experience, it's everybody who's on the call today with us. Most of us are probably sitting inside a home, as Joseph mentioned. Some could potentially be attending this from a vacation spot. They might be on a lake. Maybe they've got an RV. Who knows? And the traditional challenge we've always had with that user experience is ineffective collaboration, different tools, different ways of connecting. Consumer grade home Wi-Fi. We are probably fortunate because everybody sounded good in that initial discussion to have decent service provider in our neighborhoods, but there are many who do not. There are many areas of countries where you're getting something that would have been the same as DSL a few years ago, or some people might be reliant on cell coverage from their wireless provider. So that's a challenge. And then little support. We mentioned security a couple times. So IT is not focused on the home office, or at least IT wasn't focused on all these home offices that we're talking from. They developed and built corporate offices. So now as everybody goes home, they have to figure out who they can support and how they support. And that leads to self-reliance. And so now we're fixing the problem for ourselves, which usually isn't a great formula for success. So I know a thing or two about IT, but I would never call myself an IT manager, an IT director. And people with same skill sets or possibly less are doing the same. So those are some of the things from a user experience. And I'd like to take you through just a couple of the key things that we see from the user experience today at home. One I mentioned is I use my home Wi-Fi. And typically what this means is that the communication tools don't always perform well. So far, this conversation has been great. Hopefully the people who are listening to us are having a good experience as well, because sometimes it might be on their end. But we all know, especially in multi-person homes, we're fighting for bandwidth with the children potentially. There might be online gaming, or the family streaming movies. As Joseph said, we're not working a traditional 9 to 5 day, and our children are home from school if we have a family, or we have an extended group of people who are living with us, and they're doing it at all different times of day. I might be on this session at 6 o'clock tonight, and they've started to do that online gaming or whatever it might be. So we're sharing that bandwidth, and that's troubling, and that's a challenge as well. Also, the idea that we have limited support. Sometimes things just slow down. If you're on a cable network, your neighborhood becomes a shared network at that point. And throughout the day, things may slow down. It could be raining outside and everybody came inside and everyone's now streaming a movie, but I'm presenting on a webinar. So things slow down, or things actually become unstable. Again, where do I go? Who do I call? I'm not going to call my local provider, but I'm also not going to get the quickest response, no offense, from my IT team, because they're supporting everybody at the same time. And then also I'm relying on my own gear. So I'm fortunate. I do have a company laptop, but I'm relying on my own camera. I have my own monitor. I have my own headset. I might use a speakerphone, and again, back to my own Wi-Fi. So when I call for support, I might have to call different people. I might have to call the manufacturer of my headset because this just stopped working, or I might have to call IT because it's related to my laptop, or again, back to Wi-Fi. So many different areas that we have to react to. Then we have to look at the IT team's experience, and I would not want to be part of IT as we've transitioned. And for those who are, thank you. You've made our lives and jobs a lot easier, being able to work from home, knowing we can rely on you. But the IT team's experience is so varied now because every user is different. All 4 of us sitting in this room are in different parts of the country. And if there was an IT team set up just for this webinar, they'd have to know what Allison's situation is, what Joseph's situation is, what David's situation is, and what mine is in different places. We don't all have fancy cameras like Joseph has. Some of us have to rely on just a little headset wired to a laptop or to our ear. So it's going to be different. And again, different service providers bringing the internet into our home. Systems are going to be under stress now that IT has to focus on. They didn't budget for this. Nobody told them, come March 1st, we're going to send most of the US home, and you now have to budget for a remote working experience. And then security, as we've mentioned a few times, is missing. So maybe we have the corporate laptop, but we don't have VPN yet. or the router at home, it doesn't have any secure configuration for that environment. This was all done in the corporate environment, but now I'm home and I'm dealing with clients and there's sensitive information. And if I'm in the healthcare vertical, there's really sensitive information that we have to be concerned with. So IT has different set of challenges. Basically they're right now just fighting to keep the lights on. It used to be fighting to keep the lights on in corporate office. Now it's at home as well. So they're fighting to keep systems available. They can't easily diagnose issues today. And every user incident, every problem, and every environment is going to be different. Skills and capabilities, pressure is really placed on the systems. And the IT folks don't always understand and know how to manage and scale to now support these disparate environments. And they don't have time or the access to additional skills and resources. So it's a big challenge for these IT organizations that maybe have consolidated over the years and are supporting corporate fine with that number, but again, doesn't scale to support all these remote users. And then coming back to those security risks again. So IT is worried about security and new threats that are always present in an uncontrolled environment. And that's such a critical part of what we're doing here. And then finally, the executive experience, the CIO, the COO, the CFO. They need to control costs just like everybody else, especially capital investments. So again, we budgeted for, depending on when your fiscal year started, January, March, or later in the year, for that IT spend. Now we've got a very different situation, and that situation keeps changing, as we know from the risk today. So how do they actually budget for that, and how do they keep those capital costs down? They need their workforce to be productive. Joseph talked about this before. This is not a new conversation, remote work. And we've been talking about this for over 20 years. For the last 10 years, there has been a good portion of our population who has moved to it. But I looked quickly at the poll before, Allison, and if you add them together, 75% were working one day or never from home. So they weren't exactly adopting this ability to do this. So how do they know that they're productive? Then they have to know that something is being done with those empty corporate offices. Now they're also starting to figure out, well, if they're not going to go back, what do I do with those corporate offices? So while that's not necessarily a problem for the remote worker, that is a problem for the executives making experiences, and they're starting to figure out where to spend that money moving forward. And again, the recurring theme, they can't afford a security breach. No executive wants to end up on the cover of the newspaper or online in a story about a security breach at their company due to remote working. So team collaboration is one area that we've actually seen really help during this time, but it's also not been as effective as we would like it to be for certain organizations because they haven't rolled out that adoption plan yet. So team collaboration may have been something that they were just starting to use in their organization, or they may have rolled it out as part of this to be able to get the experience that we have right now of face-to-face conversation, but now they need adoption and they need change management, and they need a successful way to measure, activate, and deploy moving forward so they can understand the usage. The executives, again, are very, very concerned about productivity. They want to be able to measure the amount of time their employees are actually collaborating versus completing tasks. So it's great that we can have this experience, but are we getting work done? And are we being effective? And are we seeing results? They don't know with whom and how their employees are collaborating today. There's that lack of understanding, and it's concerning. And the last thing that the executives are certainly challenged with is they need to make sure that there is a work-life balance. Joseph touched on this. Our employees, myself, all of our employees are working longer hours than ever before. It's just natural. We don't have that 1 to 2 hour commute in the morning. We don't have that 1 to 2 hour commute in the afternoon. Sometimes don't find the natural break. Sometimes we find ourselves, we wake up, we run downstairs to the computer. Hopefully we're all dressed when we turn on the camera for the first time, but we know that joke about, sitting in shorts and starting the calls at 6 in the morning. And then sometimes we don't take the break in the evening. We go 6 o'clock at night, 7 o'clock at night, 8 o'clock at night. So we have to have that natural break. And so the executives are really concerned with this, and they need to account for their wellness at home. In the office, they were able to do things like bring in lunch or have a wellness room or have an activity where they took off the day. We're not seeing quite as much of that at home. So this really challenges them and affects them as well. So those is really the three areas that we focused on when we started talking to organizations about remote worker and what this bundle we're going to talk about in a minute called Home Office in a Box is all about. But I wanted to transition over to my friend at Cisco, Dave Stearns, to talk a little bit about what are we seeing from analysts and consultants today. What are they talking about when they're asked the same question?
All right. Hey, Mitch, thanks. Work-life balance. What is that? I'm still working on that myself. But hey, I thought we might start here with a few data points from two surveys that really just recently came out. One was from Fortune. It was a survey of the Fortune 500 CEOs. The second was from PwC, and it was their pulse survey. So the audience there that they surveyed was CFOs. So I'm not going to drain the slide for you. You can go online, Google, and you actually get a lot of this data if you choose to. But I think it supports everything that we've been talking about on the call. When will at least 90% of the workforce return to a usual workplace? 91% of the CEOs said, hey, maybe Q1 2021, but 26% of them say it's never going to return. How about business travel, right? When's it going to get back to normal from a business travel perspective? Kind of look like before the pandemic. 51% of the CEOs never going to look like that again. I love this particular question as a technology guy myself, right? But at my company, this crisis will have what kind of effect on the pace of technological transformation? If you've been in collab for a while, which I have been, right, we've been preaching the power of technological transformation for a long time, but 75% of the CEOs said, guess what? It's going to accelerate this stuff for us, right? Now, that was all the Fortune stuff. If you go to the CFO survey, 32% of them said that tech products and services are how they're going to still try to reinvent their business. And 54% of the CFOs said, hey, we're planning to make remote work a permanent option. I will tell you, typically CFOs are not the most friendly remote work people, right? So they're seeing that. So based on those responses and the conversations we've had so far, I've got a real simple hypothesis. And it's this: remote work due to COVID, it's kind of changed the landscape, not just during the pandemic, but moving forward as well. We've got a unique opportunity to help you reshape the workplace, I think, using technology. We saw a lot of the customers, yourself, you responded super quickly, all this shift from home stuff. We did the best we could. But what we're seeing at Cisco is a lot of our companies are really starting to reflect on how things are working. They're starting to reimagine how that shift to work from home can really benefit not just their employees, we've talked a lot about that, but also their customers. And one way that we think we can do that is just to create these persona-based bundles that we've talked about. So Mitch, if you want to roll to the next slide, in this example, you'll kind of see teleworker, business, executive, and premium executive examples. I'll tell you that NTT is a fantastic Cisco partner, and if you look at everything on the slide, they can actually wrap a lot of this into a service for you. I'm going to kind of focus on the top three pillars here, and Mitch will come back and wrap us with a couple of other things. So let me try to unpack it. First of all, you got to have a fundamentally sound network connection, from your home office, you're working from home, by the way, into the tools that people need to do business effectively every day. You got it on your campus, right? How do I do it from home? And Cisco can do this. We can support wired, wireless, 100% software-based solutions with our Meraki line. Cool part about this is stuff that's really important to IT: zero pre-staging, zero on-site configuration, really zero training required by the end user. Once you do that, you can start analyzing network traffic using sophisticated fingerprinting to ID the users, the content, the applications on the network. You start assigning policies, all that from the home office, right? Then you can start thinking about some of the stuff that we've talked about already. You start thinking about security, you start thinking about firewalls, content filtering, intrusion detection, VPNs, all that types of stuff. And by the way, we think the way to do this from work from home is a cloud-based service, and the dashboard that we have with our Meraki product is simply phenomenal to do that, as well as to automate tasks. So we talked a little bit about security as well. Everybody working from home, how do I secure this puppy? That's kind of tough to do and to actually even contemplate and think about. We have a lot of conversations about security, but I would tell you, think about three things. One is make sure your vendor's committed to the privacy of your data, particularly when you get to the cloud tools, that they're not selling that off, that they're secure by design, they're secure by default, and that they're just really simply transparent about how they go really try to drive stuff. Then you can start drilling into the key components of the technology from a security perspective. So we got the foundation, we got the network, we're secure. I'm a collab guy at Cisco, right? So let's start looking at the collab components themselves. If you look at the top portion of this teleworker bundle, tell you meetings is table stakes across every one of these bundles. Just as an aside, at Cisco, we've seen, I think we're running about 500 million monthly meeting participants, 25 billion monthly meeting minutes. Average meeting size during this has gone up about 35%. But meetings is the foundation, and the experience needs to be the same whether you're mobile device, work from home, or the office. You take that WebEx meetings platform, you wrap it with WebEx Teams, and that's going to allow you to do some really cool stuff. And this ties into the cultural aspects that were mentioned before. How do I create these unique, persistent workspaces so people can collaborate, they can share documents, they can whiteboard, they can do all that kind of stuff that they need to do. And oh, by the way, guess what? They still got to make a phone call in many cases. So you can start to layer calling into that. You can power all of this with a single app, right? That can do the meetings, the calling, and the Teams. Now, that's kind of table stakes. I might call that a collaboration platform, which Cisco talks a lot about. But guess what? Meeting fatigue can be a big deal. And there are a couple of things that we know can really help users. The first thing I would talk about is kind of work from home purpose-built video devices. That's kind of important. We've got a couple that you can choose from. We call them a DX80 or a Desk Pro. I mean, they can work, as an external monitor. We actually have some devices that I use from the home. This has got a codec set on top of a TV set, works perfectly. These devices can help you do video, voice, work with all of our tools. They can act as your primary screen. They facilitate co-creation. They can also be a dual display. One of the other things when you look at fatigue is the headset. And I tell you, this is a fascinating thing to me. Cisco's been in the headset game now for a little while. And you see a couple of models depending on the kind of the profile or the persona that you build here. But headsets is a big deal. And before COVID, I didn't hear a lot about some unique advantages that Cisco have. But one thing you can do here is we're able to troubleshoot all the way through the headset. We're able to push firmware upgrades to, from your IT out to the headset. And it's kind of a big deal when folks are really beginning to work from home. So there's a lot of things that if you just look at the bundle that NTT and Cisco, we think we can do to help you with your work from home solutions. And Mitch, I know you wanted to talk about a couple of other pillars in the stack here, if I call it that, and I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. That's wonderful. And I think for the end user, for the person working from home that we talked about, the different opportunities to use technology the way they want, whether they want to keep a light desk or they want more on the desk, they want an appliance in front of them, or even we want on the wall now because I'd like to stand up and walk around a bit. We have those options. But I think where NTT and Cisco add tremendous value is that we're also now providing this bundle, and we call it home office in a box. We wanted to keep it simple, real succinct, and provide it so that IT and executives can also answer some of those challenges they had earlier. So when we talked about application management, we want to be able to provide performance management tools back to IT so they can actually see what's going wrong in the home. So now there's transparency in the home. They're using that connected router now where they can actually get reports and logs, and they can see, oh, the problem was a bandwidth issue, and they can take care of it, or maybe call the service provider, or maybe the problem was related to the application, and they can take a look at how they're delivering service to those remote offices. They also want to make sure that they can manage that platform, because now, as we talked about earlier, IT doesn't have the scale for this. So whether it's actual management to the doorstep, which is an add-on to this solution that you see here that can actually be used. Think about your cell phone when you drop it and it cracks and somebody can come to your door and replace it. We can actually do that. Or just management of the environment, as you may have had before in the corporate office, managed network or managed collaboration. And then finally, back to the budget question, this is cost effective per user, per month type fee. So now we can take a look. I'm going to have X amount of teleworkers, business, executive, premium executives, or whatever you might call those personas that I can actually budget now through the end of this crisis and then beyond. Because as Allison pointed out earlier, people are going to continue wanting to work from home. And maybe the executives will make the shift too, because they don't have to pay for that corporate office. And of course, this allows us to make everything secured by design. I think as we start to wrap things up, because I know we're starting to get some questions here, and I'd like to talk with some of them as all these. There are three key takeaways or three key summary points that I would just like to wrap with. One is remote working is a validated business model for companies looking to move forward. And I think about what Joseph said anywhere. Typically when we talk about this, we think about corporate office and home office, but really it's corporate office and anywhere office. And we used to say anywhere, anytime, any device. And that really is so true, not only now, but moving forward. And then data insights are needed to provide a quality experience for those remote employees and are critical to productivity and performance management. The analytics that we're providing, the reporting that we're providing, the transparency that we're giving organizations, this is both for IT as well as for the business executives. IT can help provide that better experience for the users. And now the executives can see, oh, wow, my end users are being productive. My customer experience has been excellent because my contact center agents were able to communicate with the clients effectively, sometimes even more effectively than they did in the corporate office, because we've actually upgraded and moved to the cloud, as Dave mentioned, some of the applications that we didn't have before when we were on an on-prem system. And then bring the office to them, right? NTT and Cisco, we create a high quality experience for these workers, and we've become that trusted source for technology and services. So now when we think about a connected workplace or a connected workforce, we're talking about corporate plus anywhere office. So I hope you enjoyed what you heard today. Allison, I think we've got some great questions coming in.
Yeah,
So let's
yeah.
swing back to that.
Thank you. I'm so impressed by how much visibility this can give IT executives. It's incredible. Okay, so we did promise some questions, time for questions. So a wonderful one came in asking about, could you really comment on hybrid work environments? And Dave talked about how you need to keep a consistent experience where employees are spending some time on premise and other times are remote. Could you help us understand a little bit more about how to keep that experience consistent and overall how to handle that?
It's such a great question. And the reality is we've been talking about that well before COVID hit and we were forced into this crisis. But the reality is those workflows that we have in a corporate office need to be the same that we use in our remote office, wherever we may be, to Joseph's point earlier. So we have to provide them with technology that look and feels the same. They have to have the applications that look and feel the same when they get home. We can't have them doing one type of business process in the office, and then when they get home, oh, I can't do it here, so I have to go online or I have to try it on myself. It has to look and feel the same. So that's part of adoption and change management. Understanding of the job roles, how they interact, who they collaborate with, which is internal, which is external. That's really critical, Allison, to making this work well. And then, it's not just about hybrid work environments. We talked about this last week in the safe return. This could be because there's a hurricane that takes us home for 3 days, or there's some traffic incident that doesn't allow for a commute to the office, and we can just be that much more flexible and agile. And that's going to just make business better moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. And then another question came in, I think is really interesting. It's asking about tech trends that you're seeing as companies prepare for this new normal and this new way of being. So what kinds of trends are you seeing boil to the top? And I think that would be an interesting question for all of you.
Yeah, if you want me to jump
Please.
in there, I can. Cisco, we're seeing a couple things, right? It's one of the obvious ones is kind of team collab, and the tools associated with that are taking center stage. And a lot of it's not just for the technology, but it's also for what Joseph talked about. It's the cultural stuff. The tools got to enable the cultural transformation. We are seeing video become the new normal, right? Just pervasively across the world. We've been talking about video for a long time, trying to fill up rooms and offices and doing stuff like that. It's become the new normal. In collab specifically, we're starting to see the transition to cloud, that it's really accelerated. The question that was asked just a second ago, cloud can make things look the same whether you're in the office or not, or there's calling, contact center, et cetera. So cloud's taken off. And the last one that ties into the cultural thing is, I think we've been doing AI kind of stuff from home, with Alexa and all kinds of stuff for a while now. But that's really going to become increasingly more important when we get into the enterprise. And we're starting to see that kind of stuff really kick off as well. So I'd probably say those are the 4 or 5, how many I rattled off there, that Cisco's seeing.
I've got a thought on this with my CTO hat on, and I just love what NTT had to say about those packages and setup and a per user per month service contract. As a CTO, I would be all over that, because we've got a brand new category of support that we didn't have and we didn't plan for and we didn't budget for. So a contract like that with a trusted service provider that can just take care of business, I think is a phenomenal opportunity, and I would be looking closely into that. But when it comes to the tools and the trends, I think most companies out there are trying to standardize. We've got one tool for everything. We've got 5 tools for one thing, and we're trying to get that sorted out. So I think that's a top of everybody's mind. And my best advice there would be, make sure whatever you standardize on is coming from a trusted long-term partner and not somebody who's popped up overnight trying to take advantage of the marketplace.
And then there was a question that came in about phones. So desk phone number versus home versus cell comments. What are the best practices out there right now?
Yeah, so there's 2 rules of thumb with that right now. When we first went home in March, a lot of people just grabbed service numbers or agent numbers because they had customer contact. They had customer experience agents who had to quickly become a contact center, and they didn't want to use a home phone or a business phone or a cell phone, so they gave them a number that was tied to something. So you might be calling my cell phone, but you didn't know it because I had a business number, and that's a quick way to do it, and that certainly is efficient. But if we're going to truly use some of the technology that Joseph and David have both talked about today, if we're going to truly use team collaboration, then let that be tied to our office number, but nobody actually needs to know it. So if they call your office number, I've got WebEx Teams example on my cell phone, I'm gonna pick it up on my cell phone. If I'm working from my laptop with the headset as I am now, I'll pick it up on my laptop. More and more people are gonna actually just contact me by my name. I don't remember phone numbers anymore. I remember Allison, I remember Dave, and I remember Joseph, and that's how I'm going to communicate with you. So if we start to use those collaboration tools, it's less and less about the phone numbers, but you should know that you do have that option. And that's something that we've supplied to clients who, again, pushed out their agents to work from home, and they just wanted to give them a number and they didn't want to tie it to an existing number, because you do have those challenges. If somebody leaves the organization, now that phone number actually goes with them. You don't have that problem when you have a temporary number. But I really like the adoption model of starting to use that team collaboration. Doesn't matter what device I'm on now.
Right. And then, so there's so much that needs to be tackled and handled, and the bundles, of course, are a really great way to get started, to get in. But how do you prioritize where to start? So your workforce has moved online. It was sudden. Now you want to take it to the next level. Where do you prioritize? How do you think about prioritization?
I think every organization is going to be different. I think every industry has different challenges, whether it's healthcare, finance, but you start with strategy. You start with sitting down with the different business units in your organization, and you look at what their specific requirements are. Some might be trying to gain more clients. So how does outreach now work in a remote world? Some might be trying to sell. They might be in retail. So how do we take a look at new processes around curbside and pickup and delivery? And then others are handling other different issues. It might be manufacturing and things like that. So I think you sit down with each of the business units. We do strategy assessment with them, and then you build a roadmap and you see what can we do year 1, year 2, year 3. This is also where Joseph's comments about uniformity of platform really become important too, because what we've seen a lot of organizations, this organization picks that collaboration tool because they know the CTO, and this business unit picks that. We can't have that. We need to be on a uniform platform. And if I dare jump into one of the other questions that was there, Allison, somebody asked a question about competitors, and they mentioned Microsoft Office 365 and Microsoft Teams. We don't view Microsoft as a competitor, and Cisco doesn't view Microsoft as a competitor. We can integrate Microsoft solutions into the collaboration solutions. So we know people using Office 365 for their applications at work, for productivity. So we can integrate that into a collaboration platform, but it's important that the organization as a whole has that same ability to integrate as well. So we'll sit down and take a look at what are your existing platforms today? Where have you invested in licenses? We don't want you to throw away everything and just go to one platform per se. If you've already standardized something, we'll integrate that in. But it's so critical that the customer facing, the internal facing, where my CEO does the quarterly reviews, where my manager does my one-to-ones, that we're used to this technology and that it works. And then everything on the back end is integrated into that.
I just want to put an exclamation point and emphasis on what you just said, because from the end user's perspective, having these things seamlessly integrate, we'll never get down to a single platform probably in that ideal scenario. So we need that integration to happen very seamlessly. And this is a big lift for most IT staff. So we're not really thinking about or prepared for this kind of smooth integration of these technologies. So I think that having a trusted partner like NTT to help out with that is a good option.
And we have time for one last question. I want to get everyone's thoughts. There was a question that came in asking, do you think most people will keep working from home even once we get the COVID-19 pandemic under control? And you work with so many different organizations. We saw the poll results that indicated that, but I'd really love to get your thoughts on what you're really seeing. Are people going to stay working at home?
So we're seeing at minimum 20 to 30% are going to stay working from home. Those who are given the option, who can do their jobs at home, will at a minimum take a portion of the week now to work from home. So we do see that continuing. There are some industries that certainly, or some roles within organizations that just can't be done remotely. They must be, whether they're frontline workers or they're in healthcare, and their job puts them in that spot, so they won't change. But I think what you will see, and I've heard this from really every size organization that I've talked to, from the largest to the smallest, is that flexibility is going to be so critical, given the option. And I think it's a great shift, because we were starting to talk about this with the millennials coming out of school and what they were looking for. And they just want those options. They want the ability to work the way they want to work. And I think, going back to last week's conversation, will also change the way the office looks. I don't think you're going to see that open space and those chairs right next to each other. It's going to be more of an office model where it's very easy to work and go home and then come back in and have your conference room set up the way you want it that day, but also have something at home. So we're going to see the office change and really start to morph into more of this hybrid world. So I think it's going to be less, Allison, really about whether you want to work from home or work in the office. It's going to be work where I want to work, how I want to work, and when I want to work. Without the commute, 9 to 5 is probably a thing of the past as well. It's going to be very flexible now.
Yeah. And for our listeners, Mitchell was referring to another webinar that was put on by NTT, also sponsored by NTT. And so that recording and this one, there were some questions about whether this will be available as a recording. Yes, it will be available, so you can share it with your team. So we are out of time, but I want to thank you all for sharing your perspective on such a vitally important topic, and a special shout out and thanks to NTT for sponsoring this.
Thank you, Allison. Happy to be here.
Thanks, everyone.